They told me I wasn't invited to my own sister-in-law's wedding because it was family only. What they didn't know was that their dream venue, the one they'd been bragging about for months, actually belonged to me. And when they posted that family only caption on social media while standing in my gardens, well, let's just say their perfect day was about to become very expensive. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Chen, and 2 years ago, I thought I'd found my fairy tale when I married Ryan Mason. He was everything I thought I wanted. Charming, successful, from a well-established family in Riverside, California. I was 27, then teaching business classes at Lakewood Community College, living in a modest apartment downtown, and genuinely believing that love could bridge any gap between two different worlds. Ryan had pursued me relentlessly during our college years, showing up to my study sessions with coffee, walking me to classes, telling me I was different from all the other girls he'd dated. He made me feel special, chosen, like I was worth fighting for. When he proposed after 3 years together, I thought I was stepping into a life where I'd finally belong somewhere permanent and beautiful. The Mason family owned a successful real estate development company that Robert Mason had built from the ground up after his military service. They lived in Hillcrest, the kind of neighborhood where every house had a 3-car garage and professionally maintained landscaping. Linda Mason ran the local charity circuit with the efficiency of a military general, and Rebecca, Ryan's younger sister, had somehow transformed her privileged lifestyle into a social media career with over 100,000 followers documenting her authentic California living. From the moment Ryan brought me home to meet his family, I could feel the invisible measuring tape being pulled across every aspect of who I was. My clothes, my accent, my family background, my career choice. Even the way I held my wine glass at dinner got quietly catalogued and found slightly wanting. Nothing was ever said directly, of course. The Masons were far too sophisticated for outright rudeness. Instead, Linda would make comments like, "How refreshing that you work with your hands, dear," when I mentioned teaching. Rebecca would post photos of family gatherings with captions about grateful for our tight-knit family bonds, while I stood just outside the frame. Bob would interrupt my stories about growing up in my grandmother's house with, "What Sarah means is," before launching into his own anecdote that somehow made my experiences sound quaint and simple. Ryan always promised things would get better once they got to know me properly. He'd squeeze my hand under the dinner table when his mother made another cutting remark disguised as concern. He'd whisper apologies in the car afterward, swearing his family just needed time to adjust. And because I loved him, because I wanted so desperately to be part of something stable and established, I bent myself into smaller and smaller shapes, trying to fit their expectations. I started shopping at the stores Linda recommended, even though the prices made my credit card statements look like small mortgage payments. I let Rebecca teach me about better makeup brands and hair products that would help me look more polished. I signed up for tennis lessons at their country club, even though I'd rather spend weekends hiking or reading. I smiled through countless charity luncheons where I was introduced as Ryan's sweet little teacher wife, while other women discussed vacation homes and private school tuition with the casual air of people debating lunch menus. The worst part wasn't even the constant subtle corrections or the way conversations died when I walked into rooms. It was watching Ryan slowly transform from the man who'd once loved my independence and sharp wit into someone who apologized for my existence. He started speaking for me at social events, explaining what I really meant when I expressed an opinion that didn't align with family thinking. He'd schedule my work events around his family's social calendar without asking, assuming my community college commitments were less important than whatever charity auction or business dinner his mother had planned. What none of them knew, what I'd never told anyone, including Ryan, was that I wasn't the struggling young teacher they'd decided I was. My grandmother, Grace Chen, had passed away just 3 months before Ryan proposed. leaving me an inheritance that would have shocked every single person sitting around those polished dinner tables making assumptions about my financial limitations. Grace had been a remarkable woman who'd immigrated from Taiwan in the 1960s with nothing but determination and an eye for undervalued real estate. While working multiple jobs to support herself, she'd quietly begun buying properties that other investors overlooked. A run-down mansion with incredible bones, small commercial buildings in neighborhoods poised for growth, residential properties that needed vision more than money. By the time I was old enough to understand what she was building, Grace owned a small empire that generated steady rental income and had appreciated far beyond what anyone would have expected. The crown jewel of her portfolio was Magnolia Gardens, Event Center, a breathtaking 50-acre property that she'd purchased as a foreclosure in the 1980s. The 1920s mansion had been neglected for decades, its gardens overgrown, its grand ballroom gathering dust and water damage. Grace had spent 15 years lovingly restoring every detail, turning it into one of the most sought-after wedding venues in Southern California. When Grace died, her attorney had walked me through an inheritance that included not just Magnolia Gardens, but 2 additional rental properties and a small office building that housed a thriving accounting firm. The total value was approaching $5 million, generating annual income that dwarfed my teaching salary. Grace had built all of this while working as a seamstress, saving every penny, making strategic investments that everyone around her thought were foolish risks. I'd made the decision to keep the inheritance private for reasons that seemed wise at the time. Ryan and I were still planning our wedding, and I wanted to be certain he was marrying me for who I was, not what I owned. The Masons had already made their opinions about my financial status clear, and I was curious to see how long they'd maintain their condescending attitudes if they knew the truth about my circumstances. More importantly, I'd wanted to honor Grace's memory by learning to manage her legacy properly before announcing it to the world. She'd left detailed notebooks explaining her investment philosophy, her approach to property management, her relationships with tenants and vendors. I spent months working with her longtime property manager, Carlos Rivera, learning every aspect of running Magnolia Gardens while maintaining my teaching position as cover. Carlos had worked with Grace for over a decade and understood immediately why I wanted to keep my ownership quiet. He'd watched Grace navigate a business world that consistently underestimated immigrant women, and he appreciated the strategy of letting people reveal their true character before showing your hand. We developed a system where I made all major decisions about bookings, renovations, and business development while Carlos handled daily operations and served as the public face of management. The arrangement worked beautifully for the first year of my marriage. Magnolia Gardens continued its reputation as the premier wedding venue in the region, booked solid 2 years in advance, with a waiting list of couples hoping for cancellations. I was learning the intricacies of event management, building relationships with the best vendors in the industry, and quietly growing the business while the Mason family remained completely oblivious to my involvement. Ryan knew I'd inherited some money from my grandmother, but I'd kept the details vague, mentioning only that Grace had left me enough to feel more secure about our future. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He'd been sweet about it, saying he was glad I wouldn't have to worry about student loans or getting a better car, never pressing for specifics about amounts or asking detailed questions about the inheritance. At the time, I'd thought his lack of curiosity showed respect for my privacy. Later, I'd realize it demonstrated how little he actually thought about my inner life or independent capabilities. The problems began about 6 months after our wedding, when Rebecca announced her engagement to Michael Torres, a perfectly nice architect she'd been dating for 2 years. The engagement itself wasn't the issue. Rebecca had always been the golden child, and everyone expected her life to unfold like a romantic movie with premium production values. The issue was that Rebecca had very specific ideas about how her wedding should look, and those ideas centered entirely around having her reception at Magnolia Gardens. I was folding laundry in our bedroom when Ryan came home with the news, his face bright with excitement about his sister's engagement and the family's wedding planning discussions. Rebecca had apparently been following Magnolia Gardens on social media for months, collecting screenshots of ceremonies and receptions, building mood boards around the venue's signature garden ceremony space and grand ballroom. "She's absolutely obsessed with this place," Ryan told me, pulling up photos on his phone. "Look at these gardens, Sarah. Have you ever seen anything this beautiful? And the mansion itself is like something from a movie. Rebecca says it's booked out 2 years in advance, but Mom thinks she can pull some strings, maybe find someone willing to move their date for the right price." I stared at the photos Ryan was showing me, pictures of my own property, my grandmother's restoration work, events I'd personally approved and coordinated. The irony was so complete it felt like a setup for a comedy sketch, except nothing about the situation felt funny. My own family was planning to pull strings to book the venue I owned, while continuing to treat me like I was lucky to be included in their social circle. "It's beautiful," I managed to say, which was certainly true, if incomplete. "Rebecca's already called to inquire about availability. She's hoping for a spring wedding next year, maybe April or May when the gardens are at their peak. She's talking about 200 guests, full ceremony and reception package, the works. It's going to be incredible." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while Ryan slept peacefully beside me, completely unaware that his wife owned the venue his family was desperately hoping to secure for his sister's wedding. I could have solved their booking problem. With a single phone call to Carlos, could have guaranteed Rebecca the exact date and package she wanted. Instead, I found myself wondering what would happen if I simply waited to see how the situation developed naturally. The next few weeks brought a steady stream of updates about Rebecca's wedding planning progress. The Mason family had apparently made securing Magnolia Gardens their top priority, with Linda calling the venue repeatedly to check for cancellations and Rebecca driving by the property to take photos for her vision boards. They discussed strategies for getting their booking approved, Bob's connections in the business community, Linda's charity work relationships, even the possibility of offering above-standard pricing to jump the waiting list. What they didn't discuss was including me in any of the actual wedding planning conversations. Rebecca would call Ryan with updates about dress shopping, venue tours, and vendor meetings. But these family planning sessions happened without any input from or invitations to his wife. When I asked Ryan about timeline details or offered to help with research, he'd give me vague responses about how Rebecca and Linda had everything under control, how they'd include me more once the big decisions were finalized. The exclusion felt familiar by then, but it stung differently because of my hidden connection to their dream venue. I was watching my husband's family stress about securing something I could guarantee them, while simultaneously making it clear that my involvement in their celebration was optional at best. They wanted access to my property, but not my presence. My venue, but not my voice. 3 months into Rebecca's engagement, Linda called with triumphant news. They'd secured a booking at Magnolia Gardens for the following May. A couple had needed to postpone their wedding due to a family emergency, and Rebecca's name had been at the top of the waiting list. Carlos had called me that same day to confirm the booking details, mentioning that the Mason family seemed lovely, and that the bride was particularly excited about using the garden ceremony space for sunset photos. "They mentioned they have a family connection to you," Carlos had said casually. "Should I offer them any special accommodations?" I'd asked him to treat them exactly like any other client, providing excellent service without any special considerations or discounts. If Rebecca wanted to get married at Magnolia Gardens based on the venue's reputation and beauty, she'd pay standard rates and follow standard policies like everyone else. The irony of the situation was already rich enough without adding financial complications. The wedding planning intensified over the following months, with Rebecca documenting every decision on social media and the Mason family treating the event like a royal celebration, requiring months of coordination and discussion. I learned about menu selections, floral arrangements, music choices, and photography timelines through Ryan's casual mentions and Rebecca's Instagram stories, never through direct inclusion in planning conversations. The most revealing moment came during a family dinner 4 months before the wedding, when Linda was discussing final guest list numbers and seating arrangements. Rebecca had apparently been struggling with space limitations, trying to accommodate everyone she wanted to invite while staying within the venue's capacity limits. "We've had to make some difficult decisions about the guest list," Linda explained, her tone suggesting this was a burden that required family sympathy. Rebecca really wanted to include everyone, but Magnolia Gardens has strict limits, and we want to keep the celebration intimate and meaningful. "What does intimate mean exactly?" I'd asked, genuinely curious about the numbers. 150 guests for the ceremony, 120 for the reception, Rebecca answered. "It feels huge to me, but apparently it's actually considered mid-sized for weddings these days." I nodded politely, not mentioning that Magnolia Gardens could easily accommodate twice those numbers, that I'd personally overseen events with 300 guests, that their space limitations were entirely self-imposed rather than venue-related. If Rebecca wanted an intimate celebration, that was her choice, but it wasn't a restriction imposed by my property's capabilities. "The important thing is that it's family only," Linda added, giving me a meaningful look. "Rebecca wants her wedding to be about the people who've been part of her whole life, the relationships that really matter." The phrase "family only" would echo in my mind for weeks afterward, particularly as I watched Rebecca's social media posts about wedding planning become increasingly focused on themes of family loyalty, traditional values, and the importance of surrounding yourself with people who truly understood your heart. Her captions were filled with gratitude for her tight-knit family bonds and excitement about celebrating with the people who matter most. What made these posts particularly stinging was that they often featured photos of wedding planning, activities I wasn't included in, dress shopping trips, venue tours, vendor meetings, even casual dinners where wedding details were discussed. Rebecca would post pictures of herself with Linda, her maid of honor Amanda, and various cousins and family friends, always with captions emphasizing how grateful she was for her inner circle of support. The message was clear without being explicitly stated. Sarah was not part of the inner circle, not someone whose presence was essential to Rebecca's happiness, not family in the way that mattered for life's most important celebrations. I was Ryan's wife, a legal connection rather than an emotional one, someone to be included in casual gatherings, but not in moments that required genuine intimacy and trust. 2 months before the wedding, the situation crystallized in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. As if 2 years of marriage, 2 years of trying to build relationships with these people, 2 years of showing up to every holiday and birthday celebration counted for nothing when it came to defining who belonged at important moments. "Mom, she's my wife," Ryan said, but his tone lacked conviction, the kind of weak protest that telegraphed surrender before the argument even began. "Of course she is, and we love Sarah dearly. She'll be at the wedding ceremony and reception naturally. But the rehearsal dinner is different. It's about Rebecca's closest relationships, the people who've watched her grow up and supported her through everything. Sarah will understand. She's very practical about these things." Practical. That was Linda's favorite code word for describing my willingness to accept whatever arrangement the family decided was appropriate. Sarah's very practical about sitting at the singles table during family events. Sarah's very practical about not being included in gift-giving discussions. Sarah's very practical about understanding her place in the family hierarchy. "I guess that makes sense," Ryan conceded, and I could hear him moving around our kitchen, probably opening the refrigerator or checking his work emails while casually agreeing to exclude his wife from his sister's rehearsal dinner. "Should I mention it to her, or will you?" "Oh, I don't think we need to make a big announcement about it," If she asks about Friday night plans, just let her know it's a small family gathering. She'll probably prefer to have a quiet evening anyway. Maybe she can catch up on her teaching work or have dinner with one of her friends. I sat down hard on our bed, the folded laundry scattered around me, processing the choreographed nature of my exclusion. This wasn't a spontaneous decision or an oversight in planning. Linda and Ryan had discussed my absence from the rehearsal dinner as a settled matter, something that made sense within their understanding of family boundaries and relationship priorities. They'd agreed that I was practical enough to accept being excluded without making a fuss about it. The conversation continued with discussions about seating arrangements and transportation logistics, but I'd heard enough. I walked downstairs and found Ryan standing in our kitchen, scrolling through his phone with the satisfied expression of someone who'd just completed a productive planning conversation. "How's the wedding preparation going?" I asked, keeping my voice light and interested. "Really well. Mom's got everything organized perfectly. Rebecca's so excited she can barely contain herself." He looked up from his phone, giving me the kind of smile that suggested he was pleased to include me in family updates. "The rehearsal dinner is going to be at that new steakhouse downtown, just a small gathering on Friday night. Then Saturday is the big day." I waited for him to mention that I wouldn't be attending Friday night's small gathering. I gave him multiple openings to explain the guest list limitations or ask how I felt about spending Friday evening alone, while his entire family celebrated without me. Instead, he launched into details about the weekend timeline, apparently assuming I understood my role without needing explicit explanation. "Saturday morning, I'll head over early to help with setup and photos. The ceremony starts at 4, so you'll probably want to plan on getting there around 3:30. Rebecca's hoping for perfect lighting for the garden ceremony. The casual assumption that I'd simply appear for the ceremony after being excluded from the rehearsal dinner crystallized everything I'd been trying to ignore about my position in this family. I was expected to show up when my presence served their purposes, to blend into the background when they wanted intimacy, to understand the boundaries they set without requiring explanations or considerations. That evening, I called Carlos to discuss some routine maintenance issues at Magnolia Gardens, but our conversation quickly turned to the upcoming Mason wedding. Carlos had been managing high-end events for over a decade, and he had strong opinions about client behavior and family dynamics. "The bride's been by 3 times this week," he told me, his tone carrying mild exasperation. "Each time with different family members, each time with new requests about setup details we'd already confirmed. Yesterday, she brought her mother and her maid of honor, and they spent 2 hours discussing minor adjustments to the ceremony space." "What kind of adjustments?" I asked, genuinely curious about Rebecca's vision for her perfect day. "Moving the altar 5 feet to the left for better photo angles, changing the aisle runner from ivory to pure white, adding additional lighting for the sunset photos. All reasonable requests, but we'd covered most of these details in previous meetings. It feels like they're nervous about something and trying to control every possible variable." Carlos paused, then continued with the diplomatic tone he used when discussing challenging clients. The bride also asked several questions about staffing and vendor coordination that seemed unusual. She wanted to know who makes final decisions, about timeline changes, who has authority to approve last-minute requests, whether the venue owner ever gets involved in event management. I felt a chill of recognition. Rebecca was trying to understand the power structure at Magnolia Gardens, mapping out who she'd need to charm or pressure if problems arose during her wedding weekend. She was treating my venue like a political landscape she needed to navigate, rather than simply trusting the professional team Grace and I had assembled. Rebecca had planned a bridesmaids weekend in Napa Valley, a celebration that Linda was funding as part of her wedding gift to her daughter. The guest list included Amanda, Rebecca's maid of honor, 2 cousins from back east, her college roommate, Jessica, and Linda herself, invited as the mother of the bride and financial sponsor of the weekend. Ryan mentioned the trip casually over dinner, the same way he might mention Rebecca's dentist appointment or hair color change as information that was mildly interesting but didn't particularly concern me. When I realized the dates conflicted, with a community college faculty retreat I'd already committed to attending, I felt actual relief that I wouldn't have to navigate the social dynamics of a weekend with women who'd made their opinions about my place in the family abundantly clear. But then Rebecca posted photos from the weekend, and everything shifted. The pictures showed 5 women laughing over wine tastings, posing in matching robes at a spa, sharing an elaborate dinner at a restaurant overlooking vineyard views. The captions were carefully crafted to emphasize the exclusivity of the gathering. My ride or die girls, the women who've been with me through everything. So grateful for my sisters by choice and by blood. The final post, shared Sunday evening as the group was driving home, featured a sunset photo of all 5 women raising champagne glasses in a toast. Rebecca's caption read, "Perfect weekend with my perfect girls. These are the women who'll be standing beside me when I say I do, my family, my heart, my everything." 2 months until the big day, and I couldn't be more grateful to celebrate with the people who truly know and love me. Family only. Always. I stared at that post for a long time, sitting in my living room while Ryan packed for a business trip, trying to process the deliberate cruelty of that final phrase. Family only. Always. Posted by a woman who was planning to get married at a venue I owned, funded by money that would ultimately flow back to my business accounts, documented by photographers I'd personally approved, celebrated in gardens my grandmother had lovingly restored. Rebecca was about to have her dream wedding at my property while making it explicitly clear that I wasn't family enough to be included in her pre-wedding celebrations, wasn't someone who truly knew or loved. Her wasn't worthy of standing beside her during life's important moments. She was literally planning to exclude me from events happening on my own land while posting about the sanctity of family bonds. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I opened my laptop and pulled up the Magnolia Gardens booking system, scrolling through Rebecca's wedding contract and payment schedule. Everything was in order. Deposits paid, timeline confirmed, vendor coordination in progress. In exactly 8 weeks, Rebecca Mason would have her perfect spring wedding in my grandmother's gardens, surrounded by the 150 people who mattered enough to earn invitations. What Rebecca didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the woman they'd deemed not quite family enough owned every single thing that would make her perfect day possible. And it was time they learned exactly what family loyalty looked like when the power dynamics were properly understood. The morning after Rebecca's family only always post, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Ryan was already gone for his business trip to San Diego, leaving behind the usual mess of coffee grounds on the counter and a hastily scribbled note about being back Thursday evening. I sat in our kitchen, drinking my coffee in the silence he'd left behind, and realized I was grateful for the solitude. For the first time in 2 years of marriage, I didn't have to pretend everything was perfectly fine. My phone buzzed with a text from Michelle Torres, my college roommate who'd built a successful event planning business in Los Angeles. She'd been following Rebecca's wedding posts with the professional interest of someone who understood the industry, occasionally commenting about vendor choices or design elements that caught her attention. This morning's text was different. "Girl, your sister-in-law is really going all out for this wedding. Magnolia Gardens? That place costs more than most people's cars. Your in-laws must be loaded." I stared at Michelle's message, realizing she had no idea about my connection to the venue. We'd talked about Grace's inheritance in general terms, but I'd never specified exactly which properties I'd inherited or gone into detail about the business aspects of my new responsibilities. Michelle knew I had rental income now, knew I was more financially secure than I'd been as a struggling graduate student, but the full scope of my inherited empire remained private. "They're definitely stretching their budget for this one," I texted back, which was true enough. The Mason family's real estate business was successful, but not extravagant. and I knew from Ryan's casual comments about family finances that Rebecca's wedding represented a significant expense. They were treating it as an investment in their social status, the kind of celebration that would reinforce their position in Riverside's business community and provide Rebecca with the content she needed to maintain her social media presence. Over the next few days, I found myself paying closer attention to conversations I'd previously tuned out. Ryan's phone calls with his sister became opportunities to gather intelligence about wedding planning progress and family dynamics. His casual mentions of his parents' stress about costs became data points about their financial situation. Rebecca's social media posts transformed from sources of irritation into research material about her priorities and expectations. What I discovered was illuminating and disturbing in equal measure. The Mason family had been discussing my exclusion. From wedding events with the same casual planning energy they applied to flower arrangements and menu selections. It wasn't an oversight or an assumption that I wouldn't be interested. It was a deliberate strategy designed to maintain family boundaries while still benefiting from my marriage to Ryan. The revelation came during a phone conversation between Ryan and his mother that I overheard while folding laundry in our bedroom. Linda had called to discuss final headcount numbers for the rehearsal dinner, and I could hear both sides of the conversation through Ryan's phone speaker. "We've confirmed 32 for Friday night," Linda was saying, her voice carrying the satisfaction of successful logistics coordination. "Just immediate family and the wedding party. It'll be intimate and meaningful, exactly what Rebecca wanted." "That sounds perfect," Ryan replied. "Sarah will probably be relieved not to have another formal event to stress about. She's been so busy with end-of-semester grading anyway." I stopped folding the shirt in my hands, focusing entirely on Linda's response. "Oh, sweetheart, I thought we'd discussed this already. The rehearsal dinner is just family and wedding party members. Sarah isn't in the wedding party, and she's not immediate family in the same way as blood relatives. Rebecca really wants to keep Friday night focused on the people who've been part of her whole life." The casual cruelty of that explanation hit me like a physical blow. Not immediate family in the same way as blood relatives. What did you tell her? The truth. That I handle day-to-day operations, but major decisions go through ownership. She asked if she could speak directly with the owner if issues came up, and I explained that the owner prefers to work through management unless there are serious problems. How did she respond to that? Carlos chuckled. She asked if the owner would be attending the wedding, if they were local, if they were familiar with her family. I got the impression she was hoping to leverage some kind of social connection, if needed. Rebecca was strategizing about my own venue, trying to identify relationships she could exploit to ensure her perfect day remained perfect. She was planning contingencies for managing the person who owned the property where she'd chosen to get married, completely unaware that the venue owner was the same sister-in-law she'd been systematically excluding from wedding planning and pre-wedding celebrations. The irony was so complete it felt orchestrated by some cosmic force with a sense of humor. Rebecca wanted to understand who controlled Magnolia Gardens so she could manage that relationship appropriately, while simultaneously treating the actual owner like an optional addition to family celebrations. Over the following week, I began paying attention to wedding-related conversations with the focus of an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. Ryan's casual updates about planning progress became opportunities to understand how his family viewed relationships, loyalty, and social hierarchies. Rebecca's social media posts revealed her priorities and anxieties about her upcoming celebration. Linda's comments during family dinners showed her strategies for managing family dynamics and social expectations. What emerged was a clear picture of people who saw relationships as transactional arrangements with carefully maintained boundaries. I was useful when they needed someone to attend charity events and make their family appear inclusive. I was valuable when my professional connections or skills could benefit their social or business interests. But I wasn't essential when they wanted intimacy, wasn't family when they needed to limit guest lists. wasn't part of their inner circle when emotional support and genuine connection mattered most. The most revealing moment came during a family dinner 2 weeks before the wedding, when Rebecca was discussing her honeymoon plans and thanking her parents for their financial support throughout the wedding planning process. Michael had surprised her with a trip to Italy, 2 weeks traveling through Tuscany and the Amalfi Coast, staying at boutique hotels and taking cooking classes and wine tours. "I keep thinking about how perfect everything has turned out," Rebecca said, raising her wine glass in a toast to her parents. The venue, the vendors, the weather forecast, even Michael's surprise honeymoon plans. It's like the universe aligned to give me exactly what I dreamed about. Linda smiled with the satisfaction of a project manager whose careful planning had produced desired results. "You deserve every bit of happiness, sweetheart. You've always been such a good daughter, and it's wonderful to see you finding someone who appreciates how special you are. And I love that we're keeping the celebration focused on family," Rebecca continued. "There's something so meaningful about being surrounded by the people who've known you forever, who've watched you grow up and supported you through everything. It feels authentic in a way that huge, impersonal weddings don't." Bob raised his own glass. "To family, the people who matter most." I sipped my wine and said nothing, watching this tableau of family solidarity while thinking about the fact that Rebecca's meaningful, authentic, family-focused celebration was happening at a venue owned by someone they'd decided wasn't quite family enough to be included in the rehearsal dinner. They were toasting the importance of being surrounded by people who'd supported them through everything while sitting at a table with someone they consistently excluded from their support systems. The contradiction was so stark it felt like performance art, except none of them seemed aware of the irony. They genuinely believed they were celebrating family values while demonstrating exactly how conditional their version of family loyalty actually was. That night, I lay in bed next to Ryan, listening to him describe his excitement about his sister's upcoming wedding and his gratitude for how smoothly everything was progressing. He talked about how beautiful Magnolia Gardens would look in May, how perfect the weather forecast appeared, how happy Rebecca seemed about all the planning details. "She's been dreaming about this day since she was little, you know," he said, his voice soft with affection for his younger sister. "Mom has photo albums of Rebecca playing dress-up in wedding veils, planning elaborate ceremonies for her dolls. Seeing her actually get to have her dream wedding at such an incredible venue feels like watching all her childhood fantasies come true." I turned toward him in the darkness. "It's going to be expensive, though. Magnolia Gardens isn't cheap. Dad's been saving for Rebecca's wedding since she was born. He always said his little girl deserved the best, and he was willing to work extra years to make sure she could have whatever she wanted. The venue cost is significant, but it's worth it to see her this happy." Ryan's voice carried genuine warmth when he talked about his family's financial sacrifices for Rebecca's happiness. Bob had postponed his retirement plans to pay for the wedding. Linda had taken on additional real estate clients to boost their household income. They were treating Rebecca's perfect day as a family investment that justified stretching their budget and adjusting their own lifestyle plans. What struck me wasn't their generosity toward Rebecca, which was touching and appropriate. What struck me was the contrast between their willingness to sacrifice financially for her happiness and their casual dismissal of my emotional needs throughout the planning process. They'd mortgage their comfort for Rebecca's dream venue while excluding her sister-in-law from rehearsal dinners. They'd work extra years to fund her perfect celebration while making it clear that my presence at family events was optional rather than essential. The next morning, Rebecca called Ryan while he was getting ready for work, and I could hear her excited voice through the bathroom door as she updated him about final preparations. She'd confirmed all the vendor deliveries, finalized the ceremony timeline, and received the final guest count confirmations. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. "I can't believe it's actually happening," she told Ryan, her voice bright with anticipation. "In 10 days, I'll be married in the most beautiful place in California, surrounded by everyone I love most in the world." It's going to be absolutely perfect. I thought about Rebecca's definition of perfection as I got dressed for work that morning. Perfect meant having her ceremony in gardens my grandmother had lovingly restored. Perfect meant celebrating in a ballroom where I'd personally overseen dozens of successful events. Perfect meant having her dream wedding at a venue that existed because of my family's vision and hard work, while making sure I understood that I wasn't quite family enough to be included in all the celebrations surrounding her perfect day. The asymmetry was breathtaking. Rebecca would have her childhood dreams fulfilled at my property, funded by my business operations, coordinated by staff I employed, while posting social media content about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who truly mattered to your happiness. Over the next few days, I found myself thinking about Grace and the lessons she'd tried to teach me about patience, strategy, and the long game of building sustainable success. Grace had always believed that people revealed their true character when they thought they held power over you, and she'd built her business empire by letting others underestimate her while she quietly gathered information and resources. Never interrupt people when they're showing you who they really are, Grace used to say, and never make decisions about relationships when you're angry or hurt. Wait until you're calm and clear, then decide what you want to do with the information you've gathered. I was finally calm and clear. The Mason family had spent 2 years showing me exactly who they were and how they viewed my place in their hierarchy. They weren't malicious people, but they were limited people, incapable of extending genuine respect or inclusion beyond their narrow definitions of family and social acceptability. They wanted the benefits of my connection to Ryan without the inconvenience of treating me as an equal member of their family circle. More importantly, they wanted access to my grandmother's legacy without any awareness of who actually controlled that access. They were planning Rebecca's perfect day at my venue while making sure I knew my presence was optional at family celebrations. They were posting about family loyalty while demonstrating exactly how conditional their loyalty actually was. Grace would have found the situation fascinating from a business perspective and personally insulting from a family standpoint. She'd built Magnolia Gardens as a place where people's most important moments could unfold with beauty and dignity. She'd never intended for her property to host celebrations that excluded the very family members who made those celebrations possible. 2 weeks before Rebecca's wedding, I made an appointment to meet with Jessica Park, my friend from law school who'd built a successful family law practice in downtown Riverside. I told Jessica I needed advice about some property management issues, which was technically true, if incomplete. Jessica's office occupied the top floor of a renovated brick building that overlooked the historic downtown district where Grace had owned her seamstress shop in the 1970s. Sitting in Jessica's conference room, looking out at the neighborhood where my grandmother had started building her empire, I felt connected to something larger than the petty family dynamics that had been consuming my attention. "What kind of property management issues?" Jessica asked, settling into her chair with the focused attention she brought to all professional consultations. "I need to understand my rights and responsibilities as a venue owner, particularly around booking policies, cancellation procedures, and client behavior management." Jessica raised an eyebrow. "This is about the wedding venue you inherited, isn't it? The one you've been keeping quiet about?" I'd forgotten how well Jessica knew me, how easily she could read the subtext of my carefully neutral questions. We'd studied together through 3 years of law school, and she'd watched me navigate the early stages of my relationship with Ryan with the skeptical eye of someone who'd seen too many smart women make compromising choices for love. "It's complicated," I said. "It always is. Tell me what's really going on." I explained the situation. My inheritance of Magnolia Gardens, my decision to keep ownership private, the Mason family's booking of my venue for Rebecca's wedding, and their systematic exclusion of me from wedding-related celebrations. I tried to keep my tone professional and factual, but Jessica's expression grew increasingly incredulous as I outlined the basic facts. "Wait," she interrupted. Your sister-in-law is getting married at a venue you own, and she doesn't know you own it? Correct. And your husband's family has been excluding you from wedding planning and pre-wedding events while planning their celebration at your property? Also correct. Jessica leaned back in her chair, shaking her head with the expression she reserved for situations that defied professional comprehension. Sarah, this is beyond complicated. This is a disaster waiting to happen. What exactly are you planning to do with this information? I'd been asking myself the same question for weeks. The ethical implications were complex, the emotional stakes were high, and the potential consequences for my marriage were significant. But sitting in Jessica's office, looking out at the neighborhood where Grace had built something lasting and valuable, I realized I'd already made my decision. I'm going to let Rebecca have her perfect wedding at Magnolia Gardens, I said. But I'm also going to make sure she understands exactly whose generosity made that perfect day possible. Jessica scheduled a follow-up meeting for the next week, giving me time to think through the implications of whatever decision I made about Rebecca's wedding. But as I drove home from her office, I realized I'd already crossed a mental threshold. The question wasn't whether to reveal my ownership of Magnolia Gardens, but when and how to do it in a way that would have maximum impact on people who'd spent 2 years teaching me exactly how much my feelings and dignity mattered to them. That evening, Ryan came home with news that crystallized my resolve. Rebecca had called him in a panic about wedding photography logistics, worried that some of her planned shots might conflict with other events happening at Magnolia Gardens that weekend. She'd apparently spent the afternoon researching the venue's booking policies and discovered that Saturday weddings sometimes shared certain common areas with Friday evening events or Sunday morning celebrations. She's terrified that her photos are going to have random strangers in the background, Ryan explained, scrolling through his text messages from his sister. She wants to know if there's any way to guarantee exclusive access to the gardens for her photography session. I looked up from the lesson plans I was grading. What did you tell her? That she should call the venue directly and see what kind of arrangements they can make, maybe pay extra for exclusive access or extend the rental period. Ryan set his phone down with the satisfied expression of someone who'd solved a problem efficiently. Dad's already said he'll cover additional costs if it means Rebecca gets the photos she's dreaming about. The casual assumption that Bob Mason could simply pay for exclusive access to my property, combined with Rebecca's panic about maintaining perfect control over her celebration, revealed how little they understood about the business they were dealing with. Rebecca wasn't just a client at Magnolia Gardens. She was planning her wedding at a venue owned by someone she'd spent months excluding from family gatherings while posting about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who truly supported your happiness. Over the next few days, I watched Rebecca's social media posts with the fascination of an anthropologist studying a culture on the verge of encountering a reality that would fundamentally challenge their worldview. Her Instagram stories documented daily wedding preparation activities, final dress fittings, flower arrangement approvals, gift wrapping for bridesmaids, menu tastings with Michael's family. Each post reinforced the narrative of a bride whose perfect day was unfolding exactly according to plan, surrounded by people who understood and supported her vision. What made these posts particularly striking was how they revealed Rebecca's understanding of social media as a tool for constructing and maintaining an idealized version of reality. She wasn't just documenting her wedding planning. She was creating content that reinforced her personal brand as someone whose life unfolded like a carefully curated magazine feature. Her followers saw designer details, picture-perfect moments, and grateful captions about being blessed with amazing people and incredible opportunities. What her followers didn't see was the strategic exclusion of family members who didn't fit her aesthetic vision, the financial stress her celebration was placing on her parents, or the entitled demands she was making of vendors and service providers. Rebecca's social media presence was performance art designed to generate envy and admiration, not authentic documentation of her actual experience or relationships. The disconnect between Rebecca's online persona and her actual behavior became Impossible to ignore when Michelle called me Thursday evening with updates from the Los Angeles event planning world. She'd been following Rebecca's wedding posts with professional interest, occasionally sharing them with colleagues who appreciated high-end venue selections and design choices. "Your sister-in-law's wedding is getting attention in our industry. Circles," Michelle told me, her voice carrying the excited energy she brought to discussions about trend-setting events. "Magnolia Gardens is having a moment right now. 3 of my colleagues have had brides specifically request that venue after seeing Rebecca's planning posts. I felt a flush of pride about my grandmother's legacy generating positive attention in professional circles, mixed with irritation about Rebecca taking credit for discovering something she'd simply been fortunate enough to book." "What kind of attention?" "The venue is gorgeous, obviously, but what's really impressive is how well-managed everything appears to be. Rebecca's been posting behind-the-scenes content about vendor coordination and timeline management, and everyone's commenting about how smoothly the planning process seems to be going. That kind of seamless coordination doesn't happen by accident." Michelle paused, then continued with the diplomatic tone she used when discussing challenging industry dynamics. "Although, I have to say, some of Rebecca's posts are raising eyebrows. Among people who work with high-end venues regularly, she's been making requests and demands that suggest she doesn't fully understand how these relationships work." "What kind of requests?" "Trying to negotiate exclusive access arrangements that aren't typically available. Demanding vendor changes after contracts are signed. Asking for special accommodations that would require other clients to modify their events." Michelle's voice carried the mild exasperation of someone who'd dealt with entitled clients throughout her career. "It's like she thinks owning the most expensive venue in the region means she can rewrite standard business practices." The irony was exquisite. Rebecca was making demands of my business based on her assumption that her family's money gave them leverage over Magnolia Gardens' policies and procedures. She was treating my venue like a service provider she could pressure and manipulate, completely unaware that the person with actual authority over those policies was someone she'd been systematically excluding from her celebration. "How is the venue handling her requests?" I asked, genuinely curious about Carlos's diplomatic strategies. "Very professionally, from what I can tell. They're accommodating what they can while maintaining clear boundaries about what's possible. But there's definitely tension building. Rebecca posted a story yesterday about working through some logistics challenges that made it sound like the venue was being difficult about perfectly reasonable requests." I made a mental note to check in with Carlos about Rebecca's recent interactions with our staff. Managing entitled clients was part of the event business, but I didn't want Rebecca's demands creating stress for employees who were simply trying to do their jobs professionally. That weekend, Linda called to invite me to lunch, ostensibly to discuss some gift coordination for Rebecca's bridal shower, but actually to manage my expectations about my role in the upcoming wedding celebrations. We met at a cafe in Hillcrest, the kind of place where Linda felt comfortable discussing family matters without worrying about being overheard by people from their social circle. "I wanted to talk with you about the wedding timeline," Linda began, settling into our corner booth with the focused attention she brought to conversations requiring careful navigation. "There are so many moving pieces, and I want to make sure everyone understands their role in making Rebecca's day special." I sipped my coffee and waited for Linda to explain what my role would entail, already suspecting it would involve strategic invisibility during key moments, combined with helpful visibility when family photos required diverse representation. "The wedding party will be busy with photographs and preparations most of Saturday afternoon," Linda continued. "Rebecca's schedule is packed from noon until ceremony time. So I thought you might prefer to arrive closer to ceremony time rather than spending the whole day managing wedding party logistics." The suggestion was presented as consideration for my comfort and convenience, but I recognized it as strategic. Exclusion disguised as thoughtfulness. Linda was ensuring that I wouldn't be present during the intimate preparation moments when Rebecca would be surrounded by her closest supporters, getting ready for her perfect day in spaces that required Emotional authenticity rather than polite inclusion. That sounds fine, I replied, not bothering to point out that I hadn't been invited to participate in preparation activities anyway. What time should I plan to arrive? Ceremony starts at 4, so maybe 3:30. That will give you time to find your seat and enjoy the garden setting before things get started. Linda's tone carried the satisfaction of someone who'd successfully managed a potentially awkward conversation. We've seated you with some lovely people from Michael's side of the family. His aunt and uncle are delightful, and they're excited to meet Ryan's wife. The seating arrangement revealed everything I needed to know about my position in the family hierarchy. Rather than sitting with the Mason family or other relatives I'd been introduced to over 2 years of marriage, I'd been placed with strangers. From the groom's family, people who would treat me politely because they had no context for understanding my marginal status in the bride's world. What about the reception? I asked. Same seating arrangement? Actually, we've made some adjustments for the reception to accommodate different conversation groups and energy levels. Linda's voice carried the diplomatic tone she used when explaining decisions that might seem hurtful if examined too closely. You're at a table with some of Michael's college friends and their partners. Young professionals, very career-focused. I thought you'd have more in common with them than with some of our family friends. I understood immediately. Linda had seated me with people who wouldn't know enough about Mason family dynamics to notice my exclusion from family conversations or wonder why Ryan's wife wasn't sitting with his relatives. The arrangement would make my marginalization less visible to casual observers while ensuring I had no opportunity to participate in family celebrations or intimate moments throughout the evening. That sounds thoughtful, I said, using Linda's own diplomatic tone. I'm sure Michael's friends will be interesting dinner companions. The lunch continued with Linda's detailed descriptions of reception timeline, vendor coordination, and contingency, planning for various weather scenarios. She spoke with the pride of someone who'd successfully orchestrated a complex celebration, ensuring that every detail aligned with Rebecca's vision while managing the various personality dynamics and logistical challenges that made family events particularly complicated. What struck me wasn't Linda's organizational skills, which were genuinely impressive, but her complete lack of awareness about how her careful planning systematically excluded her daughter-in-law from meaningful participation in family celebrations. Linda was proud of creating an event that would make Rebecca happy while treating my presence as a logistical challenge to be managed rather than a relationship to be honored. After lunch, I drove home through the neighborhoods where Grace had owned her first rental properties, thinking about the lessons she'd tried to teach me about patience, strategic thinking, and the importance of understanding people's motivations before making decisions about how to respond to their behavior. Grace had often talked about the difference between reacting and responding, explaining that reactions were emotional and immediate, while responses were thoughtful and strategic. She'd built her business empire by responding rather than reacting, gathering information about market conditions and people's character before making moves that would affect her long-term success and security. Never make permanent decisions based on temporary emotions, Grace used to say, but never ignore what people show you about their character when they think they have power over you. Linda's lunch conversation had shown me everything I needed to know about how the Mason family viewed my place in their hierarchy and my role in their celebrations. They weren't intentionally cruel, but they were fundamentally incapable of seeing me as an essential member of their family circle. I was Ryan's wife, a legal connection that required polite management rather than genuine inclusion. More importantly, they were planning Rebecca's perfect day at my venue while demonstrating exactly how conditional their family loyalty actually was. They wanted access to Magnolia Gardens without any awareness of who controlled that access. They were benefiting from my grandmother's legacy while treating her granddaughter as an optional addition to family celebrations. That evening, I called Carlos to check on final preparations for Rebecca's wedding and gauge his assessment of our client's recent behavior and requests. Carlos had managed hundreds of high-end events over his career with Grace, and he had strong opinions about client relationships and professional boundaries. The Mason wedding is going to be beautiful, Carlos told me, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd successfully coordinated complex logistics. The bride has very specific vision, and we've been able to accommodate most of her requests within reasonable parameters. Most of her requests? Carlos paused, choosing his words carefully. She's had some expectations about exclusive access and special accommodations that go beyond standard event packages. We've explained our policies clearly, but she seems to believe her booking should include privileges that we don't typically offer. What kind of privileges? Exclusive use of the gardens for extended photography sessions, vendor access outside normal setup windows, timeline flexibility that would affect other bookings. Carlos's tone remained diplomatic, but I could hear underlying frustration about managing entitled client expectations. She's also made several comments about speaking directly with ownership if her requests can't be accommodated through normal channels. Rebecca was escalating her demands, trying to pressure my staff into making exceptions based on her assumption that her family's money gave them leverage over Magnolia Gardens policies. She was treating my venue like a service provider she could intimidate or manipulate, completely unaware that the person with actual authority over those policies was someone whose feelings and dignity she'd been casually dismissing for months. How have you been handling her requests? Professionally and consistently. We accommodate what we can within existing policies and explain clearly when requests aren't possible. But I get the impression she's not accustomed to hearing no from service providers. Carlos was right. Rebecca had grown up in a family where money solved problems and social connections opened doors that standard policies might otherwise keep closed. She'd never learned to navigate situations where her family's resources and relationships didn't automatically translate into special treatment and favorable exceptions. Is there anything you need from me to manage the situation? Not at this point. The event itself will be beautiful, and our staff is prepared to handle any last-minute requests professionally. But you should know that this client has been more demanding than most, and she's made it clear she expects preferential treatment based on her booking the most expensive package. After hanging up with Carlos, I sat in my living room thinking about Rebecca's expectations and demands, her social media posts about family loyalty and authentic relationships, and her systematic exclusion of the person who actually owned the venue where she'd chosen to celebrate the most important day of her life. The contradictions were becoming impossible to ignore. Rebecca wanted special treatment from my business while excluding me from family celebrations. She was posting about surrounding yourself with people who truly supported your happiness while treating her brother's wife as an optional addition to family gatherings. She was planning her perfect day at my property while making it clear that my presence at that celebration was conditional rather than essential. Over the next few days, I found myself thinking about what Grace would do in this situation. Grace had never tolerated people who treated her generosity as entitlement or mistook her patience for weakness. She'd built lasting relationships with people who showed genuine respect and appreciation, while setting clear boundaries with those who took advantage of her kindness. Grace also understood the power of timing and strategic revelation. She'd often waited months or even years to address problems with difficult tenants or business partners, gathering information and allowing people to reveal their true character before making decisions about how to respond to their behavior. Sometimes the best response is to let people experience the natural consequences of their choices, Grace used to say. You don't have to punish people who treat you badly. You just have to stop protecting them from the results of their actions. Rebecca's wedding was 5 days away. She'd spent months planning her perfect celebration at my venue while excluding me from family gatherings and pre-wedding events. She was about to have her dream day at Magnolia Gardens, surrounded by the people she considered essential to her happiness, completely unaware that her perfect celebration depended entirely on the generosity of someone she'd decided wasn't quite family enough to deserve genuine inclusion or respect. I wasn't going to punish Rebecca for her behavior or sabotage her wedding day, but I was also done protecting her from understanding exactly whose generosity was making her perfect celebration possible. It was time for the Mason family to learn what authentic loyalty looked like when power dynamics were properly understood. The revelation would happen at the reception, during the speeches, when Rebecca was surrounded by everyone she considered essential to her happiness. She wanted a family-only celebration at my venue, while excluding me from family events. She was about to discover exactly what family meant when the person she'd been dismissing turned out to control everything that made her perfect day possible. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of perfect California weather that made Magnolia Gardens look like a fairy tale setting. I woke up early, not because I had anywhere urgent to be, but because I couldn't sleep past sunrise, knowing that today would fundamentally change my relationship with the Mason family forever. Ryan had left the house at 7 to help with wedding setup, kissing me goodbye with the distracted affection of someone whose mind was already focused on family obligations and logistical coordination. I made coffee and sat on our small balcony, looking out at the neighborhood where we'd built what I'd thought was our life together. The morning felt suspended, like the calm before a storm that everyone could sense approaching, but no one quite understood yet. By evening, everything would be different. The careful social dynamics that had governed my relationship with Ryan's family for 2 years would be permanently altered by information that would force them to confront exactly how they'd been treating the person who owned their daughter's dream venue. Around 10, Michelle called with last-minute coordination details for her own client's wedding happening across town. She was managing a celebration that would be taking place simultaneously with Rebecca's, and she wanted to compare notes about vendor schedules and timeline logistics to make sure there weren't any conflicts with shared service providers. "How are you feeling about today?" Michelle asked, her voice carrying the gentle concern of someone who understood that family weddings could be emotionally complicated, even under the best circumstances. "Ready," I said, which was true in ways Michelle couldn't fully appreciate, without knowing the complete story about my ownership of Magnolia Gardens and my plans for the evening's revelations. "Well, from everything I've seen on social media, it's going to be absolutely gorgeous. Rebecca's been posting preparation updates since dawn, and the venue looks incredible in all her behind-the-scenes content." I pulled up Rebecca's Instagram stories while still talking to Michelle, scrolling through a carefully curated documentation of her perfect wedding morning. There were artfully arranged photos of her dress hanging in the bridal suite, her bridesmaids getting their hair and makeup done, elaborate floral arrangements being positioned throughout the ceremony space. Each image was accompanied by grateful captions about dreams coming true and being surrounded by amazing people who'd made her perfect day possible. What struck me about Rebecca's social media documentation wasn't just the obvious beauty of the setting and arrangements, but how it revealed her understanding of this day as content creation as much as personal celebration. She wasn't just getting married. She was producing a visual narrative that would reinforce her personal brand and generate the kind of engagement that maintained her influencer status. "She's definitely maximizing the social media potential," I told Michelle, continuing to scroll through posts that showcased every detail of the morning preparations. "Smart business strategy. A wedding at Magnolia Gardens is basically a portfolio piece for anyone in the lifestyle and event space. The venue photographs so beautifully that good content is almost guaranteed." Michelle was right. Grace had restored Magnolia Gardens with an eye for both historical authenticity and visual appeal, creating spaces that looked stunning in photographs while maintaining the character and charm that made the property feel timeless rather than trendy. Every corner of the venue offered picture-perfect backgrounds that made ordinary moments look like magazine features. After hanging up with Michelle, I spent the morning completing mundane tasks that felt surreal, given the significance of the day ahead. I graded final papers for my summer session classes, responded to emails from colleagues about fall semester planning, cleaned our apartment with the methodical focus of someone who needed physical activity to manage anticipatory energy. Around noon, Ryan texted me from Magnolia Gardens with updates about setup progress and timeline confirmations. The florists had finished their installations ahead of schedule, The catering team was coordinating smoothly with venue staff, and Rebecca was having the time of her life with her bridal party photography session. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. What Ryan didn't mention in his text updates, but what I could see from Rebecca's continued social media posts, was how the wedding preparations were unfolding in spaces I knew intimately. The bridal suite where Rebecca was getting ready was the same room where Grace used to retreat when she needed quiet time during busy event weekends. The garden paths where the bridesmaids were taking playful group photos were routes I'd walked hundreds of times while learning about landscape maintenance and seasonal planning. Rebecca was having her perfect day in spaces that held my family's history and reflected my grandmother's vision, completely unaware that every beautiful detail she was documenting had been made possible by someone she'd spent months excluding. From family celebrations and treating as an optional addition to important gatherings. At 2 o'clock, I began getting ready for the wedding with the careful attention I usually reserved for job interviews or important professional events. I chose a dress that was elegant enough to photograph well, but not so striking that it would draw attention from the bride, styled my hair in a way that looked polished without appearing competitive, and selected jewelry that complemented my outfit without making statements about my financial resources. Looking at myself in the mirror, I thought about how much effort I'd put into calibrating my appearance for Mason family events over the past 2 years. I'd learned to dress in ways that suggested good taste without implying wealth, to style myself professionally without appearing threatening, to blend into their social gatherings without drawing commentary about trying too hard or not trying hard enough. Today felt different. I wasn't dressing to meet their expectations or avoid their criticism. I was dressing as the owner of Magnolia Gardens, someone who belonged at this celebration not because of her marriage to Ryan, but because the entire event was taking place on her property, coordinated by her staff, made possible by her family's legacy and business success. The drive to Magnolia Gardens took me through neighborhoods I'd traveled countless times for property management visits and vendor meetings. But today, the familiar route felt like a journey toward a destination I'd never experienced before. I was driving to my own venue as a wedding guest, about to attend a celebration where I'd been systematically excluded from planning and preparation activities while remaining completely essential to making the entire event possible. Carlos met me in the parking area, greeting me with the professional warmth he maintained with all VIP guests, but adding a subtle nod that acknowledged our shared understanding of the day's unique dynamics. He'd been managing the Mason wedding with his usual excellence while knowing exactly who was actually in charge of the property and policies that governed every aspect of their celebration. "Everything looks perfect," I told him, surveying the grounds that had been transformed into a wedding wonderland with floral installations, elegant seating arrangements, and lighting designed to create magical ambiance as daylight transitioned into evening. "Your grandmother would be proud," Carlos said simply, a comment that carried layers of meaning about Grace's vision for the property, the quality of the event we were hosting, and the situation that was about to unfold during the evening's festivities. The ceremony space was breathtaking. Rebecca had chosen sunset timing that would make the garden setting look like something from a romantic movie, with golden light filtering through the restored landscaping that Grace had spent decades perfecting. Guests were already arriving and finding their seats, dressed in the kind of elegant attire that suggested they understood they were attending a premium celebration at one of the region's most exclusive venues. I made my way to my assigned seat, exactly where Linda had promised, at the back with Michael's relatives whom I'd never met before today. The aunt and uncle she'd mentioned were indeed delightful people who welcomed me warmly and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know Ryan's wife better. They had no context for understanding my marginal position in Mason family dynamics, so they treated me with the natural courtesy extended to family members at important celebrations. From my seat, I had a clear view of the ceremony setup and the reserved seating where the Mason family had positioned themselves in the front rows. Linda looked elegant and proud in her role as mother of the groom. Bob appeared appropriately emotional about his daughter's wedding day. and Ryan stood with the groomsmen looking handsome and happy to be supporting his sister's celebration. At exactly 4 o'clock, the ceremony began with the kind of flawless coordination that reflected months of careful planning and professional event management. The bridal party processed down the aisle looking picture-perfect, followed by Rebecca in a dress that was absolutely stunning and undoubtedly expensive enough to serve as content for multiple social media posts. Rebecca looked genuinely radiant as she walked toward Michael, her happiness visible even from my seat at the back of the gathered guests. Whatever complicated feelings I had about her treatment of me over the past months, I couldn't deny that she made a beautiful bride, having her dream wedding in a setting that showcased both her personal style and her family's social aspirations. The ceremony itself was lovely, with personal vows that revealed genuine affection between Rebecca and Michael, readings selected by family members that spoke to themes of love and commitment, and musical selections that created the perfect emotional atmosphere for the garden setting. It was exactly the kind of celebration that made Magnolia Gardens' reputation as a premier wedding venue, the type of event that generated referrals and positive reviews that kept our booking calendar full years in advance. As Rebecca and Michael exchanged rings in my grandmother's gardens, I thought about Grace's vision for this property as a place where people's most important moments could unfold with beauty and dignity. She'd wanted Magnolia Gardens to host celebrations that honored love and family, creating memories that would last lifetimes while supporting the community of vendors and service providers who made such events possible. What Grace hadn't anticipated was that the venue would host celebrations where family members were systematically excluded from meaningful participation while still being expected to attend as guests. She'd never imagined that someone would plan their perfect day at Magnolia Gardens while treating the property owner's granddaughter as an optional addition to family gatherings. The ceremony concluded with Rebecca and Michael's first kiss as a married couple, followed by enthusiastic applause from guests who were clearly moved by the beauty of the celebration and the obvious happiness of the newlyweds. The photographer captured the moment with professional skill, creating images that would undoubtedly become centerpieces of Rebecca's social media content about her perfect wedding day. During the cocktail hour that followed, guests mingled throughout the gardens while the wedding party took formal photographs in locations that showcased Magnolia Gardens' most photogenic features. I circulated among Michael's relatives and other guests I'd been seated with, making polite conversation about the venue's beauty, the ceremony's emotional impact, and Rebecca's obvious happiness with how everything had unfolded. What became clear during these conversations was how little most guests understood about my relationship to the Mason family, or my connection to the venue where they were celebrating. People assumed I was simply another family member enjoying Rebecca's wedding, with no awareness of the careful social engineering that had positioned me at the margins of family activities while still requiring my presence for appearance's sake. The reception began at 6 with cocktails in the main ballroom, followed by dinner service that showcased the culinary excellence that made Magnolia Gardens a preferred venue for discriminating clients. Rebecca and Michael made their grand entrance, to enthusiastic applause, clearly thrilled with how perfectly their celebration was proceeding, and grateful for the beautiful setting that was providing the backdrop for their perfect day. During dinner, I sat with Michael's college friends and their partners, exactly as Linda had planned. They were interesting, accomplished people who treated me with natural warmth and seemed genuinely curious about my work as a community college instructor. The conversation was engaging enough that I might have enjoyed myself if I hadn't been acutely aware of how deliberately I'd been excluded from family tables where Ryan was laughing with his relatives and sharing stories about growing up with Rebecca. The irony was impossible to ignore. I was having pleasant dinner conversation with strangers while my husband celebrated with his family at a venue I owned during an event that existed because of my family's vision and business success. The people treating me with the most genuine warmth and interest were those who had no investment in the Mason family's social hierarchies and boundary-setting strategies. As dinner concluded and the evening transitioned toward speeches and dancing, I felt the anticipatory energy that had been building all day reach its peak. The moment I'd been planning for months was approaching. The revelation that would force everyone in the room to confront exactly who had made Rebecca's perfect day possible and how they'd been treating that person throughout the engagement and wedding planning process. Linda approached the microphone first, delivering a heartfelt mother-of-the-bride speech about watching Rebecca grow into a remarkable young woman and finding someone who appreciated her unique qualities. Her words were genuine and moving, reflecting the pride and love she felt for her daughter and the happiness she felt about Rebecca's marriage to Michael. Bob followed with his own emotional tribute to Rebecca, talking about the little girl who'd played dress-up weddings in their backyard and the beautiful woman who'd found her perfect partner and perfect venue for celebrating their love story. He thanked Michael's family for welcoming Rebecca warmly, acknowledged the vendors and venue staff who'd made the celebration possible, and raised his glass to toast the happiness of the newlyweds. Ryan spoke next as Rebecca's brother, sharing childhood memories and expressing his excitement about gaining Michael as a brother-in-law. His speech was warm and funny, showcasing the close relationship he'd always had with his sister and his genuine happiness about her wedding day success. Then Rebecca took the microphone for her own thank you speech, radiant with happiness and clearly moved by the emotional tributes she'd just heard from her family members. She thanked her parents for their support and generosity, expressed gratitude to Michael's family for welcoming her so warmly, and acknowledged her bridal party for their friendship and assistance throughout the planning process. I also want to thank Magnolia Gardens for providing the most beautiful setting imaginable for our celebration, Rebecca continued, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone whose dreams had been perfectly realized. This venue is absolutely magical, and having our wedding here has made everything feel like a fairy tale come true. She paused, scanning the room with the confident gaze of someone who knew she was surrounded by people who loved and supported her happiness. Most importantly, I want to thank my family for always believing in me and supporting my dreams. Having all of you here tonight, celebrating with the people who matter most to me, means everything. This truly is a family celebration in every sense of the word. The applause was enthusiastic and sustained, reflecting genuine affection for Rebecca and appreciation for the beautiful celebration she'd created. As the clapping died down and guests prepared to transition into the dancing portion of the evening, I stood up from my table and made my way toward the microphone. Rebecca looked surprised to see me approaching, but she smiled and handed over the microphone with the gracious gesture of someone who assumed I wanted to offer conventional congratulations or express gratitude for being included in such a beautiful celebration. "Thank you, Rebecca," I said, my voice carrying clearly throughout the ballroom thanks to the professional sound system that was part of Magnolia Gardens' event infrastructure. I do want to add my own thoughts to tonight's speeches. The room settled into attentive quiet, with guests focusing their attention on what they assumed would be a brief, conventional tribute from the bride's sister-in-law. Ryan looked mildly curious from his position at the family table, probably wondering what I planned to say since he knew I wasn't particularly comfortable with public speaking. "Rebecca, you mentioned how grateful you are to Magnolia Gardens for providing the perfect setting for your celebration," I continued, making eye contact with the bride who was still glowing with happiness about her perfect day. "I want you to know how meaningful it is to hear that, because this venue represents my family's legacy in ways that I think will surprise everyone here tonight." I could see confusion beginning to register on Rebecca's face, and I noticed Ryan straightening in his chair as he started to suspect that my speech might not follow the conventional patterns he was expecting. My grandmother, Grace Chen, purchased this property in the 1980s and spent 15 years restoring it into the beautiful venue where we're celebrating tonight. When she passed away 3 years ago, she left Magnolia Gardens to me, along with her other properties and the business empire she'd built through decades of hard work and strategic investment. The silence in the room was complete now. Every guest was focused on my words, trying to process information that fundamentally changed their understanding of the evening's dynamics and relationships. So when Rebecca talks about having her fairy tale wedding at this magical venue, I want everyone to understand that this celebration is taking place on property that belongs to me. The gardens where you exchanged vows, the ballroom where we're celebrating tonight, the staff who've coordinated every detail of your perfect day, all of this exists because of my grandmother's vision and is now part of my responsibility and legacy. Rebecca's face had gone completely pale. She was staring at me with an expression of shock and growing comprehension about the implications of what I was revealing. Around the room, guests were turning to look at each other with confusion and surprise, trying to understand how they'd missed such a significant detail about the evening's host and setting. I kept my ownership of Magnolia Gardens private because I wanted to honor my grandmother's memory by learning to manage her legacy properly before making it public knowledge. But I also wanted to see how people would treat me when they thought, I was just a community college teacher, married into a family with higher social status and greater financial resources. Ryan was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning realization about how many assumptions he'd made about our relationship and my circumstances. Over the past 18 months, I've watched this family plan Rebecca's dream wedding at my venue, while making it clear that I wasn't quite family enough to be included in rehearsal dinners, wedding planning discussions, or pre-wedding celebrations. I've listened to conversations about how I needed to learn my place in family hierarchies and understand my role as someone who should be grateful for conditional acceptance. Linda had gone completely rigid in her chair, her face reflecting the horror of someone who was beginning to understand the full scope of what had been happening and how their treatment of me would now be viewed by everyone present. Rebecca, you've spent months posting about family loyalty and the importance of surrounding yourself with people who truly support your happiness. You've talked about having your perfect day with the people who matter most to you, celebrating family bonds that are authentic and meaningful. I paused, letting the weight of that irony settle over the room. What I want you to understand is that your perfect day has been made possible by someone you've consistently excluded from family gatherings, while posting about the sanctity of family relationships. You've had your dream wedding at a venue owned by the sister-in-law you deemed not quite family enough to attend your rehearsal dinner. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Rebecca was still staring at me, her mouth slightly open as she processed the complete reversal of everything she'd believed about power dynamics and social hierarchies throughout her engagement and wedding planning. I'm not telling you this to ruin your celebration or embarrass you on your wedding day, I continued, my voice remaining calm and clear. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand exactly whose generosity has made your perfect day possible. And I want everyone here to understand what family loyalty actually looks like when it's authentic rather than conditional. I handed the microphone back to Rebecca, who took it automatically while still staring at me with shock and confusion. Congratulations on your beautiful wedding, I said. I hope you and Michael have a wonderful marriage and that you've learned something tonight about recognizing the people who actually support your happiness, even when they don't look like what you expected. I walked back toward my table, aware that every person in the room was watching me while trying to process what they'd just learned. The silence stretched until Michael, showing remarkable presence of mind for someone whose wedding reception had just taken an unexpected turn, began to applaud. The applause spread gradually throughout the room, starting with Michael's family and friends who had no investment in Mason family dynamics and extending to other guests who seemed to appreciate the dramatic revelation they'd just witnessed. Rebecca stood at the front of the room, still holding the microphone, clearly struggling to find words for a situation she'd never imagined having to navigate. Over the next hour, the reception continued in a surreal atmosphere where everyone was processing new information while trying to maintain celebration-appropriate behavior. The band played, guests danced, and conversations continued. But there was an undercurrent of shock and reassessment that colored every interaction. Ryan approached me during a slow song, asking if we could talk privately. we stepped onto one of the garden terraces where we'd have privacy from other guests. "Sarah, I don't understand," he began, his voice carrying confusion and what might have been hurt. "Why didn't you tell me you owned this place? Why didn't you tell me about the inheritance?" "I wanted to see how your family would treat me when they thought I had no power or resources," I replied. "I wanted to understand what kind of people they really were, and what kind of person you were when you had to choose between defending me and maintaining family harmony." Ryan was quiet for a long moment, processing implications that were clearly overwhelming for someone who'd never questioned his family's social dynamics or treatment of outsiders. "What does this mean for us?" he asked finally. I looked at him. This man I'd loved enough to accept years of subtle humiliation and systematic exclusion, and realized I already knew the answer to his question. "It means you have some decisions to make about what kind of marriage you want, and what kind of family you want to be part of," I said. "But those are decisions you'll have to make without me." I left him standing on the terrace and walked back, through my grandmother's gardens toward the parking area. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of Rebecca's wedding reception continuing, the celebration that had revealed everything I needed to know about conditional love, authentic loyalty, and the difference between seeking acceptance and demanding respect. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new downtown office, reviewing quarterly reports for Harbor Properties and Grace Legacy Ventures, the company I'd established to manage my inherited real estate portfolio and expand into sustainable property development. The divorce had been finalized 2 months earlier, with Ryan keeping the apartment and me keeping everything that had actually mattered. Michelle knocked on my office door, carrying coffee and the excited energy she brought to successful project completions. "The Thompson wedding at Magnolia Gardens was absolutely perfect," she told me, settling into the chair across from my desk. "The bride cried when she saw the ceremony set up, and the photos are going to be stunning. Carlos outdid himself with the coordination." I smiled, thinking about Grace's vision for the property as a place where people's most important moments could unfold with beauty and dignity. She'd been right about the power of patience, strategic thinking, and letting people reveal their true character before making decisions about how to respond to their behavior. "Any word from the Mason family?" Michelle asked, her tone carrying careful curiosity about people who'd become local legend after Rebecca's wedding reception revelation. "Rebecca moved to Arizona after the marriage didn't work out," I said. "Apparently, Michael had some thoughts about the kind of person who would systematically exclude family members while benefiting from their generosity. Linda and Bob are managing their financial situation after overextending for a wedding that didn't result in the social benefits they'd expected." "And Ryan? Dating someone new. Someone who apparently fits their family aesthetic better than I ever did." Michelle raised her coffee cup in a toast. "To people who show you exactly who they are, and to grandmothers who teach you to pay attention." I touched my cup to hers, thinking about Grace's lessons about building something lasting and authentic, about the difference between earning respect and demanding it, and about the satisfaction that comes from rising above people's expectations rather than sinking to their level. Through my office window, I could see the downtown neighborhood where Grace had started building her empire with nothing but determination and strategic vision. She'd been right about everything: patience, authenticity, and the power that comes from owning your own table instead of begging for seats at someone else's. Rebecca had wanted a family-only celebration at my venue while excluding me from family gatherings. She'd learned exactly what family meant when power dynamics were properly understood. Sometimes the best revenge isn't bringing people down. It's rising so high they have to look up to see you, and then choosing not to look back. The morning after Rebecca's wedding, I woke up in my own bed for what I knew would be one of the last times. Ryan hadn't come home the night before, choosing instead to stay at his parents' house to help with post-wedding cleanup and family crisis management. His absence felt like relief rather than abandonment, the first quiet space I'd had in months to process what had happened and plan what came next. My phone had been buzzing continuously since I'd left the reception, filled with messages from people who'd witnessed the revelation and wanted to understand more about the story behind what they'd seen. Michelle had texted 3 times with variations of, "Girl, call me immediately." Jessica Park had sent a lawyer's pragmatic message about scheduling a consultation to discuss my legal options. Even some of Michael's college friends from my dinner table had reached out, expressing admiration for how I'd handled what they described as an impossible situation with grace and strategic brilliance. But the message that surprised me most came from someone I hadn't expected to hear from, Michael Torres himself. He'd texted around midnight, long after the reception had officially ended. "Sarah, thank you for your honesty tonight. Rebecca and I need to have some serious conversations about the kind of people we want to be. I hope you find the happiness you deserve." I made coffee and sat in the morning sunlight streaming through our kitchen window, thinking about Michael's message and what it revealed about the ripple effects of speaking truth in situations where people had become comfortable with lies and selective awareness. Michael had married Rebecca believing he was joining a family that valued loyalty and authentic relationships. Last night, he'd discovered that his new wife had systematically excluded the very person whose generosity had made their perfect wedding possible. Around 10, Linda called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity about how she planned to manage this situation convinced me to pick up. "Sarah, dear, I think we need to talk." Her voice carried the careful control of someone who'd spent the night strategizing about damage management and relationship repair. "There seems to have been some misunderstanding about family dynamics and your role in Rebecca's celebration." The word misunderstanding was so perfectly chosen that I almost admired its diplomatic precision. Linda was framing 2 years of systematic exclusion and conditional acceptance as a communication problem that could be resolved through better explanation and mutual understanding. "What kind of misunderstanding?" I asked, genuinely curious about how she planned to rewrite the history of her family's treatment of me. "Well, we had no idea about your connection to Magnolia Gardens, obviously. If we'd known you owned the venue, we would have included you much more directly in the planning process. We would have treated the whole situation differently." Linda's explanation revealed everything I needed to know about how she understood relationships and respect. In her worldview, people deserved consideration based on their resources and social status rather than their humanity and family connections. She was essentially admitting that they'd treated me as disposable because they'd assumed I had no power, and that they would have behaved differently if they'd known I controlled something they wanted. "So, you're saying you would have included me in rehearsal dinners and wedding planning if you'd known I could offer you special accommodations at my venue?" The pause before Linda's response told me she was realizing the trap her own explanation had created. "That's not exactly what I meant," she said carefully. "What I'm trying to say is that we value you as part of our family, and perhaps we didn't communicate that clearly enough during the wedding planning process. Linda, you told Ryan that I wasn't immediate family in the same way as blood relatives. You seated me with strangers at both the ceremony and reception. You planned an entire weekend of wedding events that I wasn't invited to participate in." My voice remained calm, but I could feel years of accumulated frustration finally finding expression in clear, direct statements. "Those weren't communication problems. Those were deliberate choices about my place in your family hierarchy." Another pause, longer this time. "Perhaps we could meet for lunch and discuss this more privately," Linda suggested. "I think there are things that could be explained better in person, and maybe we could find a way to move forward that works better for everyone." The invitation to lunch felt like an attempt to return to the familiar dynamic where Linda managed family relationships through careful conversations that established boundaries while maintaining plausible deniability about intentional exclusion. She wanted to have the kind of discussion where she could explain away my concerns while making me feel grateful for her willingness to address the situation at all. "I don't think lunch is going to solve this," I said, "but I appreciate the offer." After hanging up with Linda, I realized that Ryan still hadn't called or texted since leaving the reception. His silence felt significant, not because I expected immediate apologies or explanations, but because it revealed how he was processing the fundamental shift in our relationship dynamics. For 2 years, Ryan had been married to someone he perceived as lower status than his family, someone who should be grateful for conditional acceptance and flexible about social boundaries. Last night, he'd discovered that his wife actually controlled resources and held social position that his family had been desperately trying to access. The cognitive dissonance must have been overwhelming for someone who'd never questioned his family's social hierarchies or treatment of outsiders. Ryan was probably struggling to reconcile his understanding of me as someone who needed protection and guidance with the reality of me as someone who owned the venue where his sister had just celebrated her dream wedding. Around noon, Carlos called with updates about post-event cleanup and coordination with vendors who were removing equipment and decorations from the previous night's celebration. He maintained his usual professional tone, but I could hear underlying satisfaction about how the evening had concluded. Everything went smoothly with the breakdown, he reported. All vendors were professional and efficient. The Mason family left around 11, and the bride seemed thoughtful about the evening's events. Thoughtful was a diplomatically chosen word for what Rebecca had probably been feeling after learning that her perfect family-only celebration had depended entirely on someone she'd systematically excluded from family gatherings. Any feedback from other guests about the venue or service quality? I asked, maintaining focus on business considerations despite the personal drama that had unfolded. Entirely positive. Several guests specifically commented about the beauty of the property and the excellence of our staff coordination. One couple asked for our business card because they're planning their own wedding next year. That was the beauty of Grace's vision for Magnolia Gardens. Regardless of the personal dynamics between clients and their families, the venue itself maintained its reputation for providing exceptional settings and service for life's most important celebrations. Rebecca's wedding had been genuinely beautiful, and her guests had experienced the kind of magical evening that made Magnolia Gardens one of the most sought-after venues in the region. "There is one thing you should know," Carlos continued, his tone becoming more cautious. "The bride asked to speak with me privately before leaving last night. She wanted to understand more about the venue's policies and ownership structure." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That you've been the owner since your grandmother's passing, that you've been involved in all major business decisions, and that you personally approved their booking and coordinated their event management." I could imagine Rebecca's reaction to learning that every aspect of her perfect wedding had been overseen by someone she'd deemed not quite family enough to include in pre-wedding celebrations. The woman who'd spent months making demands about special accommodations and exclusive access had been negotiating with staff who answered to the sister-in-law she'd been excluding from family gatherings. That afternoon, I drove to Jessica's law office to discuss the practical implications of what had happened and what options I had for moving forward. Jessica had been following the situation with the professional interest of someone who specialized in family law and understood how quickly personal relationships could become legally complicated. "So let me make sure I understand this correctly," Jessica said, settling into her chair with the focused attention she brought to complex cases. "You own a multi-million-dollar venue. Your husband's family has been treating you like a charity case for 2 years. They planned a wedding at your venue while excluding you from family events, and now they want to have lunch to discuss misunderstandings." That's an accurate summary. Jessica shook her head with the expression she reserved for situations that defied professional comprehension. "Sarah, this goes beyond marriage problems. This is about fundamental respect and recognition of your agency as an individual and business owner." She was right. The issues with Ryan's family weren't just about wedding planning or social dynamics. They reflected deeper problems about how people viewed relationships, power, and the obligation to treat family members with basic dignity, regardless of their perceived social status or financial resources. "What are your options legally?" Jessica asked. "In terms of the marriage or the business?" Both. But let's start with the marriage, since that's probably the more immediate concern. I'd been thinking about this question since leaving the reception the night before. Ryan and I had built what I'd thought was a partnership, but his behavior over the past 2 years had revealed it to be something more conditional and hierarchical. He'd consistently chosen family harmony over defending his wife, allowing me to be excluded from important events while expecting me to remain gracious about systematic marginalization. "I think the marriage is over," I said, surprising myself with how clearly I could articulate what I'd been feeling for months. Not because of last night specifically, but because of what last night revealed about how Ryan sees me and our relationship. Jessica nodded with the understanding of someone who'd counseled many people through similar realizations about partnerships that had become untenable. "And the business implications? I want to make sure the venue's reputation isn't affected by family drama. Magnolia Gardens has been successful because of its professionalism and discretion, and I don't want client relationships to be complicated by personal conflicts with the Mason family." That's smart thinking. Separating personal issues from business operations will protect your long-term interests regardless of how family relationships develop. We spent the next hour discussing practical strategies for managing both the divorce process and potential business complications. Jessica's advice was characteristically clear and strategic. Focus on protecting my assets and business interests while avoiding unnecessary conflict that could damage my professional reputation or personal well-being. When I got home that evening, Ryan was waiting in our living room with the expression of someone who'd spent the day processing information that had fundamentally challenged his understanding of our relationship and his family's behavior. "We need to talk," he said, which seemed like an understatement given the circumstances. I sat down across from him, maintaining the calm, strategic mindset that had served me well during the previous night's revelation and throughout the day's conversations with family members and professional advisors. "I don't understand why you didn't tell me about owning Magnolia Gardens," Ryan began, his voice carrying hurt and confusion. "We're married. We're supposed to share important information about our lives and finances. I wanted to see how you and your family would treat me when you thought I had no power or resources," I replied, using the same explanation I'd given him the night before. "I wanted to understand what kind of people you really were when you didn't think there would be consequences for your behavior." "That's not fair, Sarah. You set up a test that we didn't know we were taking." Ryan's response revealed how he was processing the situation as a problem of insufficient information rather than inappropriate behavior. In his understanding, the issue wasn't that his family had treated me badly, but that they'd treated me badly without knowing I had resources that should have earned their respect. "Ryan, your family excluded me from your sister's rehearsal dinner. They seated me with strangers at her wedding. They spent 2 years making it clear that I was tolerated rather than welcomed." I kept my voice calm and factual. "Those behaviors were wrong regardless of my financial status or property ownership. But if we'd known about your inheritance, things would have been different." "Exactly, and that's the problem." Ryan was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling to understand why conditional respect based on resources was problematic rather than simply practical. "So where does this leave us?" he asked finally. I looked at this man I'd loved enough to accept years of subtle humiliation and systematic exclusion, and realized I already knew the answer to his question. "It leaves us getting divorced," I said. "Because I deserve a partner who defends me regardless of my bank account balance, and you deserve a wife who fits into your family's social expectations without requiring them to examine their treatment of people they consider beneath their status." The divorce proceedings took 3 months to finalize, during which time I moved into a downtown loft apartment that offered views of the business district where Grace had built her empire. Ryan kept the suburban apartment that had never quite felt like home anyway, along with furniture and household items that carried no emotional significance for me. What surprised me most about the divorce process wasn't the legal complexity or emotional difficulty, but how little I missed the daily interactions and shared routines that had defined my marriage to Ryan. I'd been so focused on trying to earn acceptance from his family that I'd stopped noticing how much energy I was spending on managing relationships that consistently left me feeling diminished and excluded. Living alone for the first time in years, I rediscovered parts of myself that had gotten lost in the effort to fit into social dynamics that were never designed to include me authentically. I started hiking again, something I'd given up because the Mason family preferred tennis and golf. I returned to reading the kinds of books that had always interested me, rather than the bestsellers that generated conversation at their dinner parties. I began cooking the foods I actually enjoyed, instead of the cuisine that impressed Ryan's parents during family gatherings. 6 months after Rebecca's wedding, I was reviewing quarterly financial reports for Grace Legacy Ventures in my downtown office, when Michelle knocked on the door with coffee and updates about her latest wedding planning projects. "How's business?" she asked, settling into the chair across from my desk with the comfortable familiarity of someone who'd become not just a professional colleague, but a genuine friend throughout the transition period. "Growing faster than I expected," I told her, pulling up spreadsheets that showed revenue increases across all properties in my inherited portfolio. Magnolia Gardens is booked solid through next year, and the rental properties are generating steady income that's allowing me to expand into sustainable development projects. "Any regrets about the Mason family situation?" I considered the question seriously, thinking about the past 6 months of building an independent life, while watching the consequences of the wedding night revelation continue to unfold for people who'd learned too late that their treatment of others had actual costs. "None," I said, which was true in ways that still surprised me. "I'm grateful for the experience, actually. It taught me the difference between seeking acceptance and demanding respect." Michelle raised her coffee cup in a toast to demanding respect and building something better on your own terms. I touched my cup to hers, thinking about Grace's lessons about patience, strategic thinking, and the satisfaction that comes from rising above people's expectations rather than sinking to their level of conditional loyalty and social hierarchy maintenance. Through my office window, I could see the downtown neighborhood where Grace had started building her empire with nothing but determination and strategic vision. She'd been right about everything: the power of authentic relationships, the importance of controlling your own resources, and the freedom that comes from building your own table instead of fighting for seats at someone else's. Rebecca had wanted a family-only celebration while excluding the person whose family had created the venue where she celebrated. She'd learned exactly what family loyalty looked like when power dynamics were properly understood. Sometimes the best lesson you can teach people is that their actions have consequences. And sometimes the best gift you can give yourself is the courage to stop protecting people from the results of their choices. The Mason family had shown me exactly who they were when they thought they held power over me. I'd simply stopped protecting them from the natural consequences of that revelation. Now I was building something authentic and lasting, surrounded by people who valued integrity over social status and genuine connection over conditional acceptance. That was Grace's real legacy. Not just the properties and financial security she'd left me, but the wisdom to recognize my own worth and the courage to demand the respect I'd always deserved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.